We ready? All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special board meeting on June 10th at 5:30 p.m. This is a virtual board meeting on Zoom, and the links on the bottom of the agenda in board book. Ms. Rashford, will you take a roll?
Yes. Mrs. Barker.
Here.
Mr. Bryant.
Here.
Mrs. Fairgrieve.
Here.
Mrs. McCabe.
Here.
Mr. McNally.
Here.
Ms. Weibel.
Here.
Mr. Manheim.
Here. Thank you. Will everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everyone. Do we have any citizens?
We have 4 comments tonight.
All right, Mrs. Barker, will you read our statement, please?
Yes, I will. The school code provides for a public comment period at each board meeting, subject to reasonable constraints. The practice of this board is to limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker to a total of 30 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers addressing the board are expected to maintain a reasonable level of civility. Also, personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. Comments regarding individuals should be respectful. Insults and defamatory remarks have no place in this setting. The board will terminate public comment if speakers cannot adhere to these guidelines. Please identify yourself at the beginning of your remarks.
Good afternoon. My name is Jillian Love. My daughter, Kendall Love, is a special education student at Fox Ridge. She'll be transitioning into kindergarten this fall and attending Belgraham in the STRIVE program. My wish is for this to be submitted for public comment at the upcoming school board meeting. Our daughter, Kendall, has multiple disabilities and is globally delayed. She has a neurological impairment as a result of a traumatic delivery that impacts her vision, physical growth, and fine motor and speech. Kendall works harder than most children and most adults every single day of her life. As a special needs family, I think I can speak confidently on behalf of many families in our current situation when I say that this shutdown and transition to e-learning has been a nightmare for us. I know the teachers care. I know the therapists care. So please understand, we recognize and appreciate their efforts in trying to meet the needs of our child and others like her. But here are the facts. It's not enough. It's not even close to enough. We're not inside, nearby, outside, or around the ballpark. Still, we accepted our need to shelter in place and do the best we could with the tools we had. We did our part. And we did so under the assumption that the district would be planning immediately for different scenarios and ways to reopen in-person learning as soon as possible. Perhaps I was naive in that assumption, because when Governor Pritzker's order came in to reopen in-person summer school learning, the district claimed to be unprepared and caught off guard. We're simply not ready. And that is my 10-month-old crying in the background. We were told that you were not ready, and that is completely inexcusable and unacceptable. Not to mention the fact that we were never offered any options for additional private therapy or one-on-one learning. Nothing was looked into for having our students working with private providers to continue gaining skills and maintaining skills. The only battle cry we heard was stay at home, keep e-learning, and how can we make e-learning work for your child? You set the bar low for our families, and you've kept it there. Special needs children are losing ground in a big way. They're losing skills they might never recover. So the lack of urgency and preparedness to get them back into the classroom tells me that special needs students are not a priority to this district. You looked first at the many students who will not have as hard a time going back in the fall or continuing e-learning if that's what's necessary. You didn't think about a visually impaired 5-year-old on a computer screen with multiple disabilities and behavioral emotional deficits trying to learn. And that's why I'm here commenting now, because her voice matters to me. Her gains matter to me, as do her losses. I'm disappointed by the lack of preparedness and consideration for special learners this summer. I hope that won't be the case come fall. Please step up for our kids. Thank you for your time.
Hello, this is Kathy Hodge, and I have three students that will all be in middle school next year, but I have two that one is going to be in the Infinity program, and the other one I have placed an appeal for. And I'm wondering if the board can do anything about the fact that the appeals process doesn't seem to be moving forward. And I understand that with e-learning and everything that we had to go through during the spring, that I think the staff and the teachers did an amazing job teaching our kids during that time and being flexible and handling a lot of situations that we didn't know how to handle. But as far as the appeals process, it seems to have just stopped. And the reason is that, well, we can't meet in person to continue the appeals process. And I'm wondering why those appeals cannot be conducted over a Zoom meeting or something like that. And also the governor has recently announced that summer school students can meet in person with student teachers. And we haven't been given any information as to a timeline, and I'm trying to be patient, but I'm running out of patience because the school year is starting soon, and I have no information whatsoever as to the status of the appeal that I filed on behalf of one of my students. So if the school board could please do something to at least let parents know who have filed appeals what the status is, what exactly will be happening, and lay out some sort of timeline for us, it would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Michelle Casillo. I'm speaking today to ask questions about reopening school in the fall. The cost to implement all the COVID safety precautions in schools has been estimated at $2 million to $6 million, depending on which news outlet you listen to. The board has yet to vote on setting money aside to pay for COVID expenditures. When will the board vote on purchasing items such as PPE, cleaning products, plexiglass dividers, signage, sanitizer, etc.? When will you discuss how schools will be cleaned daily, temperature checks handled, food prepared and served, riding the bus? Will there be a registered nurse in every school? How will you identify and measure the educational gaps and get the students caught up? If remote learning is implemented as well, will students follow the daily class schedule with instructional videos for each class? Will teachers be in their classroom to access all their resources and materials? You're asking parents and guardians to pay registration fees, dues, supplies, etc., with no knowledge of what a student's day will look like in the fall. How can parents and guardians decide if they want to pay for orchestra, PTO, sports, clubs, etc. in the fall? Will these be offered? I understand that you are also overwhelmed by these questions, but the stay-at-home order is lifted, and there are only 9 weeks left of summer break. You are leaders, board, and superintendents alike. 12,000 students, teachers, parents, and guardians are relying on you to step up to the plate and make and communicate these decisions quickly. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Shannon Sullivan, and I am a parent of a freshman and junior in the fall. And after listening to the Monday night board meeting, I felt a bit unsettled about what I did not hear discussed. As you know, our kids are supposed to be going back to school in just over 8 weeks from now, and no one talked about what going back to school in the fall may look like for K through 12 students. For example, how will high school students be taught different subjects while living under COVID mandates? How are we beefing up janitorial services across the district to handle high touch points throughout each day? Hygiene and cleaning are key components for lessening the spread. Or, if we are not going to be inside our buildings come fall, what is the plan for e-learning student structure? Students need structure. I know my students do. Will the teachers be in their classrooms on a screen teaching, following the students' real-time schedule? How will the reopen committees communicate throughout the summer? I would urge all of you to think outside the box, reevaluate your current priorities related to spending, and tap into the unlimited resources we have in our community. Let's partner and get our kids safely back in the buildings where they desperately need to be, and that is with their teachers. Lastly, thank you to Mr. Mannheim for your email on June 4th. That same format would be a great way to communicate reopening plans as they evolve throughout the summer. I appreciate your time and all of your efforts getting our kids back to school. Not an easy task. Thanks.
That concludes citizen comment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. All right, thank you for those comments from our citizens. Now our next item is why we're here tonight is our item for discussion, and it's our board workshop, setting district goals and direction. So this time I think I'll turn it over to either Dr. Pearson or Ms. Grant, whoever would like to take over.
I think I'm actually starting the meeting. So first of all, I really appreciate the board taking the time tonight to spend some time together to work with Lori Grant from the IASB. She's here to facilitate a goals workshop for us. As you know, as a district, we have a couple of documents and some guiding principles that help us make decisions and plan in our district, both our strategic commitments that we have committed to as a district, but then also as a board, you've worked through some value statements and identified a list of board commitments that also help us shape direction for the work that we do every day in our schools. And the next step in that process is to identify some overarching goals that we can then use for our planning going forward. And interestingly enough, we've had this scenario occur with the COVID crisis, which has really changed the way that schools will look for the fall. And this is a really good time for us as a board to have a conversation about some of the things that are most important as you set some goals for us as a district. And then as a district team, we'll be able to take those goals and move them into actionable steps to accomplish them in the timeline that's been established. So I really appreciate your time tonight, and I look forward to our conversation, and I thank Lori for being with us tonight. So Ms. Grant, I think we're ready to begin.
Wonderful, thank you, and hello to everyone on the school board who I have not said hello to yet, and thank you, Dr. Pearson. I'm going to share my screen and start with a little bit of a presentation to just review the role of the board and the superintendent when it comes to setting goals, but also for anyone that is watching, so they also have a better understanding of the board's role, especially when it comes to setting goals and the direction for the district. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and bear with me 1 second. The item I'm looking for has disappeared from the screen, of course. Oh, 1 second here. All right. That's very strange. 1 minute. There it is. Okay. So, yes, goal setting here is going to look a little different than a normal workshop. Usually we do this workshop in the format being live, and it is usually over a 4-hour time span. And this case with our current situation, let me get this shared. Are you all seeing my screen? Give me a thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, so I apologize for that delay there. So our agenda this evening, I'm gonna just do a brief little presentation, but the bulk of this evening is going to be you discussing. You did a whole lot of pre-work that we're going to share tonight in our SWOT activity. And that is the bulk of what we're going to discuss tonight. And from those thoughts from the SWOT activity, we're going to set your priorities. And from those priorities, we're going to set goals. Now, in our original discussions, this is around the COVID lens because it is a very urgent and immediate piece that needs to be focused on. However, you also want to keep in mind non-COVID goals as well. So just as we talk tonight, everything's on the table. And so we're gonna set our priorities. And then from that, the goal tonight is to actual set goals and to hand those goals over to Superintendent Pearson, who will bring them to the staff and determine how they're gonna go forward to make those goals reality. So ground rules tonight. This is your meeting. Please make the most of it. Listen, share, engage. Your voices are so important. Many of you have already put a lot of thought into this, and you've been listening to your community, and it's vital that you are willing to engage tonight. But we are going to keep to the agenda. I think many of us have Zoom fatigue, and I'm gonna move things along. So please don't be offended if we start to stray, if I kind of cut you off and kind of lead you back. So keep to the agenda tonight. So currently in the present, this is our goal setting process is taking us over this bridge from present day to the future. So we're assessing current data. We're thinking about what are our needs? Where are we at right now? And where do we want to go? And you have a beautiful vision statement that I'm going to share with you in here in just a second. And that encompasses the end goal, the vision, your values, and how are we going to get there, which is tonight. How are we going to go to meet that vision and set the goals and long-term planning? And then how do you breathe life into those goals? How are you progressing? That's where the monitoring comes in. And that's a big, important part of the role of the school board, is to monitor those goals and adjust as needed. So a quick review, I know our school board has seen this several times, but our 6 foundational principles of effective governance. The #1 principle is the board clarifying the district purpose. And that is the bulk of what we're going to be talking about tonight, is the purpose and the direction the district needs to take in the upcoming year, 18 months. The second principle is the board connecting with the community, and that's not just giving information to the community. It is a two-way conversation. It is getting the interest of the community and keeping that in mind in all that you do as you prepare these goals. The board employs the superintendent, and then as a result of that, the board delegates authority to Dr. Pearson to make those goals happen. And then this is a piece that often kind of gets missed, and it's a step that you don't want to skip, and that is monitoring performance, monitoring the performance of the goals and adjusting as needed. If anything that the past 3 months have taught us is that we need to be nimble, and we have to be willing to adjust and be flexible. And goals, once you've breathed life into them by monitoring them, are also a living, breathing thing, and they can be adjusted. And the goals you set tonight could very well in September or October be obsolete, and you need to go back to them and adjust them. So we're going to talk about making a monitoring plan and to check in on those goals that you set this evening. And then finally, the board takes responsibility for itself and make sure that it's governing in the very best way they possibly can. So those are the 6 principles of effective governance. And then just want to review very quickly the board work and superintendent work when it comes to setting goals and just the work of governance in general. So the board governs the school district, answers the questions who, what, how much, and decides by voting. It's a democracy, elected officials at a convened meeting. Identify intended results. Board work is the ends. The superintendent work is the means. The superintendent manages the school district, answers how, when, where, by whom, recommends, implements, and then leads the staff to improved performance and compliance with your board policies and with the goals that you set. The superintendent work is the means. So the board is the ends, the superintendent is the means. Now this really great quote, actually one of your board members reminded me of from a great book. Actually, I'll share it with you. It's You can see that, maybe not. It's called the governance core. And it is a great definition of really what governance is. Effective trustees operate from a strategic context rather than a tactical or administrative context. They understand that they are not on the board to administer the organization, but rather to govern it. So when you put all of this together, you've got the board saying who, what, how much, the superintendent making all of that happen with the how, the when, the where, the by whom, creating strategies and action plans with the staff in conjunction with the community and having a dialogue that's continuous, thus the circles. It never ends. It's three-way: board, superintendent, community, and reverse. So when that happens and trust and communication takes place, you're truly unstoppable. It is when all of these things are in sync that the moving forward is an easy task. However, I should have never used the word easy because this is not an easy task. There's a lot that happens here, but these are the roles of the board and the superintendent, and to bring all of that together through dialogue with the community. And of course, here's the ends. Of course, this graduation picture looks a little different than our graduation this year, but hopefully we'll get back to this. But the board continually defines, articulates, redefines district ends. And this is, in a nutshell, what you want. These are the ends, that graduate and moving out into the world and a bright future. And here's why those ends are important for the board. It drives St. Charles school districts. It empowers the staff, permits performance monitoring and evaluation. You can't monitor and evaluate something that doesn't exist. You have to know what direction you're going in order to figure out where you're at. It speaks for the community and it ensures alignment between the community values and the school operations. So all of those ends, the elements of that are your values and your beliefs, your mission, your vision, which I'm going to share with you, and then the goals that we're creating tonight. So if you don't remember this, the St. Charles Vision Statement, here it is. And it's on your website. The District 303 school community empowers and inspires all to attain excellence, learn with passion, and live with integrity in a changing world. That's the vision that is for your district. So that vision, when you look, I love this graphic because it shows the importance of the alignment of those values and beliefs in that vision. And that SWOT analysis that you did had that vision in mind. And from that analysis, all of that needs to align. So you see the district goals that we're going to work on tonight aligns with what the superintendent goals will be for this coming year, who will take those goals and use, will also align with your principal and the classroom and then the student goals. It all has to be in sync and in alignment. So with that vision in mind and the ends in mind is what we're going to do tonight as we consider your goals. So district level goals, outcome necessary to achieve your vision within a set time period, set the strategic direction of your school. They must be able to be measured and monitored and modified as needed. And they should address a need or eliminate a problem or build on a strength, which is what you focused on in this SWOT analysis that we did prior to this evening. Normally this SWOT activity would have happened in the workshop, and it's probably a good chunk of the workshop. So thank you so much for doing this activity in advance because this is going to allow us to be very productive tonight. So the fact that you put all of that thought and energy into it prior, very much appreciated. So that SWOT, those strengths, what you have going for you, anything you can improve upon, your weaknesses, those are usually internal. The external opportunities and threats, opportunities that are leads that you can focus your energy on, and then obstacles you have to leap over those threats. So we focused on the 5 really vital categories for a school district, which is student achievement and curriculum, programs and services, facilities, district finances, and then community and district relations. So without skipping a beat, I'm going to jump right in. But before I do, I would love to know if any of you have any comments or questions before we move on. Make sure you unmute. Are we good to continue? All right, so here's the goal. We are going to go through each SWOT analysis, and hopefully you were able to print them out, or at least you have another screen that you can look at them separately. I'm going to start with student achievement and curriculum. And what you did as a board is you focused on the strengths. So SWOT stands for strengths, weakness, opportunity, threat, strengths. And we're going to start with that and review that. And I would love for you to just take a look at that on your own. I have it on the screen if needed. And I'm going to unshare the screen so we can all see each other. And if you have anything you'd like to add or discuss, focusing on the strengths of student achievement and curriculum. Let me raise this up a little bit. It's kind of tricky with this screen here. There we go. So a lot of strengths in student achievement and curriculum. Is there anyone that have any thoughts or anything to add to this list? Seeing none, let's continue on to student achievement and curriculum weaknesses. So I'm going to let you take a look at that. It is on the screen as well. And I will tell you that usually when we pick our priorities for the goals, using your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats, that is usually a signal. It is, if you're sleuthing, discovering what it is that you need to focus your time on. So usually the strengths are wonderful to see and great information, but the goals are usually driven when you look at that SWOT activity, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So any thoughts on that? I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. Anyone would like to comment on any of the weaknesses that you see in your achievement and curriculum? Yes, Carolyn.
I wanted to just add in to some of the weaknesses I'd like to focus on for 2021, specifically about trying to have our students more interactive with our teachers more interactive with our students. I don't know if it's because of the COVID, so it's hard to call it a weakness because it's more circumstances. So I just want to be careful about calling it a weakness per se, but about a challenge, I suppose, about how we can figure that out. So if we are physically going to be present in the buildings, whether our students are part-time or and our teachers are full-time, we really need to make sure that they are more interactive and that there's an instructional component with our students on an everyday basis. So they're working with our students in an instructional component where they're not just referencing a Khan Academy or a digital learn. They either do a video instruction or they do a classroom piece instruction or something where they're actually doing more instruction with our students. I think, due to COVID, our e-learning, we were in a rush time frame. And so I think we have the time now to be more thoughtful about how we interact. If it is going to be in an e-learning component, how we're going to do that.
Thank you.
I'm
taking notes and then I'm going to add it in there.
Yeah,
so
no worries. I'm not sure how you want to make that more succinct, but.
Yep, nope, that's great. I'm taking notes. Thank you. Anyone else have comments on that? Do you all have hard copies? Do you need me to share the screen? Everybody have hard copies? Okay.
I wonder if you want to share the screen so the audience can see.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I guess The other thing I was going to ask our fellow board members is, do we want to focus on things we want to achieve for next year? I mean, we do have 20 to 22. So I know we talked about as a board, long-term goals about, for instance, raising our assessment scores. So for 9 through 12, for instance, it would be SAT scores. So, I mean, I'm not sure how specific we want to get in here about that. Does anyone have any feedback about that? I know we've talked about it before.
So as I'm looking through obviously high school math was noted several times as an area, that's an area of need, right? We need to continue to work on that and work towards that. And I do think we need to set, you know, a performance metric about it. I mean, we were given.
Right, I guess I'm asking, do we want to broaden it out to be and say, you know, achievement scores in general? And do we want to set a metric with it? Thank you, Mrs. Barker.
I don't know if it's necessary to do in general. I mean, what we're looking at with the SAT, the data that we can collect, kind of that endpoint data is either math or English, you know, it's CLA. So
well, we have composite data from 17, 18, and 19.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that in 17, it was in the 1100s, same in 18, it went up a little bit, and then 19, it dropped down. So to, I think it was 10 something, 1090s.
The metric
so,
composite is, it's good to have a composite.
Yeah, it was 1095 I have here.
It
So
should be above 1100. And then I think we can break that out into having something specific when it comes to the math as well.
Right.
Do both. I think having both, because it is a big part of that component.
We because they test that way, we certainly can break things out, and we can take a look at individual math scores, for example, if that's an area where we want to focus. The one concern, of course, that we have is what is the standardized testing going to look like moving forward, at least in the short term?
Yeah, I guess if I could jump in, I would probably look at this a little bit differently, and I would like to see us set goals that were related to how we are adapting and what our strategy is and the results in a COVID environment. And then as we're checking in against that, whether it's in 90 days or at the end of this semester or whatever the appropriate time frame is, then we readjust. If things are going well, we've closed learning gaps, and then we look at what I would say are longer term goals given our current environment related to SAT results and so forth.
I think we can do both. I think we can look at having, you know, a short term, or we just don't have any where to start from with that one. I almost think we need to wait till the beginning of the school year and adjust and add that in. Does that, I don't know if that makes sense, because then we'll have whatever the first, you know, ready and we'll get the PSAT data, and then we'll really know where gaps are. Part of the guidance document, you know, includes that the district should be prepared to assess gaps right away. If we're able to get that data, I definitely think we should have a special meeting to sit down and re-talk about that and add in some of those short-term goals like you're talking about, Heidi. I think the only thing is we just don't have a starting point, so it's hard to put a way to monitor that on top of you know, not having the beginning data.
Well, I think that's I agree with what I think perhaps the starting point is setting a timeline for when a timeline and a structure to, these are the assessments or the sources that we're going to use, whether it's iReady or whatever, for the students when they go back, and then a timeline for when we're going to have some data to be able to look at. And as far as under COVID-19 goals and longer term, I mean, I would defer a little bit to Dr. Pearson. my only hesitation is that I want to make sure that he feels comfortable that the team is able to look at both. I don't want one to be slighted versus the other if we're going to give them multiple goals.
On that note, I think kind of what we're all sort of saying here is we have to figure out precisely how we're going to patch the hole in the boat before we determine how fast we can go. And I think that's, they can both be done, but we do have a short-term issue first. And I think we need to make sure that we address that. But I think, I agree, we do want to have that longitudinal goal of how far are we going to go? What are we going to do with SAT? What areas of focus do we need to look at in order to improve those scores? Those are all things we need to do. But in the short term, we have to figure out really what those gaps are as a result of really not having a fourth quarter in full schooling, and how we might need to address that, or really how much there is to address.
Right. I just want to make sure we're looking at the historical reflection of the fact that we were going backwards before COVID came on board at the assessment level between 9 and 12. So we have the data that shows that we were going the wrong way when it comes to academic achievement. So
you're right.
I think the question that we have to ask is what types of formative assessment tools do we have that are going to allow teachers to assess these kids at the beginning of the year and then also continuously throughout the first term and semester. So I think really focusing on that and the tools that we can provide for the teachers is going to be an important piece to this.
Okay, so I'm going to weigh in here a little bit because I'm a little concerned we're in the weeds. And so I'm wondering if I agree with everything everybody has said, but if we're setting a goal, should the goal be that we expect that assessments will be used as early as possible to inform instruction and close the gap? And
I agree with you. With the addition to that is the earliest possible. I would like to put some markers around that.
Right. And that would be fine. I'm just concerned that we're getting into what formative assessments we might need, that it needs. I agree that our math needs to be attended to immediately, but not at the expense of all kids at all grade levels because of what's happened. So we're gonna, I think we expect that the administration will take care of business because that's our goal. We will want data and information of how they're going to address the gaps. And we expect that those gaps will be closed or decreased in a timely manner, whatever the specifics are.
And I'm going to respectfully disagree, Mrs. McCabe. When we are setting SMART goals for a superintendent and for a district, we need to set a goal that has a metric base, right? Has a way to measure. We have data that shows us the measurements for 9 through 12, not math, for the whole grade, for the composite SAT. And you guys are I think we're talking two different things. You're talking math, I'm talking composite SAT. We have the data that we are going in the wrong direction. And so taking COVID out of the equation, we need to put an expectation on that has to go in the right direction. That is I don't think that's an unreasonable ask.
I'm not saying not to do that. What I'm saying is, I think the board needs to be absolutely clear about what our expectation is and get the staff and the superintendent to do that work. So if we expect that the high school achievement scores should be going up, then I'm not, and you know, I'm not a big person for getting a particular metric that we want to hit. I would put this, and that's just me. I can live with how the board goes. But what I'm concerned about is that we're going to get into what should the curriculum look like, what should, no, that we expect that.
I don't think anybody has said anything about curriculum. Here's what I'm going to say. If we follow the guidance that's being given to us and the purpose of us having this meeting about setting district goals in the direction of the Board of Education, what it is asking us and what is typical and what you know, the guidance is that we're writing SMART goals and they are more longitudinal. And I do understand we have this very special thing that has happened that is so new. What I don't want to do is have a runaway train and everything be about, you know, this fourth quarter, and we don't even have the data to tell us whether or not there are giant gaps in needs, because we don't know that yet. We have to assess that first, and we need to let the district do that. There's guidance that they need to do that, and if we want to make a goal about doing that, I don't know if we can yet. That's the problem, because we have to have metrics. They need to be measurable because we need to monitor them. That is our job. And right now we don't necessarily have goals that we can monitor in the way that it is intended that we monitor them.
And I want to be, could I just be perfectly clear, or as clear as I can be at this point? I'm not suggesting that we don't have those metrics. I just don't think that, I think we limit ourselves if we say that we're going to reach a certain target. I think we want to direct the district to do the work to get our kids to the highest level as quickly as possible.
Lori, would you
we actually direct the district on what, sorry, Mrs. Barker, just 1 second. We should actually direct the district to concentrate on what we want for the results, but we have to define what the results are.
Well, and this is where I'm saying that it's difficult to give that direction. And so we need to probably establish now, what do we want to look at? When they come back, we have the iReady program in place, which is supposed to be able to give data for each student, what their gaps are. And so it's my hope that the district can tell us how they, if that's what we're going to do. I don't want to tell them how to do it or what to do. I want them to come back to us and say, this is what we're going to do with iReady in order to show you where those gaps are and how we're going to address them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head there, because we need to let them figure it out. We may have a significant gap in one area, and we then need to go back and write the results that we want to see regarding that. And that may be in gifted or special education. It may be more general that we don't know yet. So I'm about writing a goal where we don't have any information. We already have information.
Can I ask, this is probably a question for Jason, and I think, and Carolyn, we originally scheduled this goal setting, it was around the lens of COVID-19 and re-entry into the school in the fall. And knowing that that was urgent, and perhaps these goals right now, if we're focusing on re-entry, for example, I hear you talk about iReady being the tool to determine what the achievement gap is. I guess this is a question for all of you and for Jason. If we want to filter this down, do you want this workshop tonight to be focused on goals to bring you into next year? And then once you've arrived and you've determined what the gaps are and you've set that goal and you let the staff figure out how they're going to reach that goal. And maybe the measurable piece of your goal is, has every student been measured? Not what the measurements are, but have they been measured? Does that make sense? And then revisit that come December or January and when you have that data and that baseline and go from there. But I don't know if, I want to make sure that our workshop tonight is valuable and focused on the right things. So I would love to hear what Jason and all of you, how you feel about that.
So I mean, I think one of the things that's happening is we're in a very unique situation, and it's complicating the conversation, particularly around student achievement. And there's some reasons why. One is we were not able to give state assessments in the spring. So we already have a pretty big missing piece in our longitudinal story for student achievement. And so we're missing information for all of our students than we would have typically had related to literacy and math achievement, really 3 through 12. The nice thing is we are using, at the high school, we've been giving PSAT and SAT. So we're going to be able to continue to have some of that data. But for the purpose of identifying instructional gaps and achievement gaps for students as they return to school, those assessments will not provide that kind of data. It will help us validate what's happening in the classroom and what's happening with students against the long-term information. So it's kind of a summative. It will be a summative designation for us to kind of double check to see that students are actually achieving at the level where we believe they are achieving. We are going to implement iReady, and I think that tool right now is going to be the best tool for us to track student progress towards achieving those goals. And that's pretty much 3rd grade. They can be used less than 3rd grade. K1 is using some FastBridge, but then we can start using iReady, and we have that all the way through the 8th grade. So that's going to give us information in literacy and math about where students are, what the gaps are, and then we can monitor their progress. So what I heard you say is you want us to identify the instructional gaps for students in math and literacy. You want us to find a way to track student progress in the short term. And you want us to identify, based on those identified gaps, establish some strategies that we're going to use to address or close that instructional and achievement gap for students, based on the information that we're able to collect. I think we're able to do that in those grades and in those subject areas using that particular tool. You also approved for the high school, Alex, which is going to give us some information about math achievement at the high school. And so we'll have that data as well. So I guess what I'm hearing right now is incorporated in the goals are identifying instructional and achievement gaps for students, find a way to track student progress, particularly through the first semester or when we don't have any assessment, nationally normed assessment data, and based on the identified gaps, establish some strategies to begin to work on improving student achievement and closing those gaps for student learning. So that's what I heard.
Those are 3 solid goals in student achievement and curriculum right there. Will you please say your 3rd one again there? Establish strategies to work.
I said based on the identified gaps. So after we give that initial assessment, then for us to figure out, what strategies are we going to use to close those student achievement and instructional gaps? How do we plan on doing that?
What are your thoughts on that, Board of Education?
I agree with that summary, and from my perspective, that approach. I would just like to see the plan be time bound. So targets in terms of, when are the assessments going to be completed, for 90% of the population, or whatever the appropriate metric is. That's my perspective.
And we will, as we go on through this, once we identify those goals, the high level, board level goals, then we can fill out and figure out the identifiers and put a time frame, make it a SMART goal. Any other thoughts? on these three goals that Dr. Pearson has identified?
I'll jump in really quickly. I thought I agree with everything. I think that's spot on. I still do think that we as a board need to decide if we are going to have a COVID lens with this meeting tonight, or we are going to look at it more globally.
Agreed.
Me personally, I think it was originally scheduled to have a COVID lens where we were determining goals to get students back into the classroom and make sure they're, any gaps are filled, or whatever issues there might be. So I think that would be my priority for tonight.
I agree as well. We always talk in education about foundations. And I think if we don't do that first, we're trying to build the building without making sure the foundation is sound.
I agree too. I would also say that I think Ms. Weibel's concern about the future needs to be kept in front so that we know this isn't, we're gonna be back at this to look at it once we get our feet on the ground.
I would like to have some very clear, when are we going to do that? Because what I don't want to happen is the beginning of the school year starts and, things are rolling and we haven't looked at anything that is really for the year in its entirety. We already had issues that we needed to address that we need to look at. And I understand we want to look at it as just getting us to this point. We need to make sure that there's that next step. We can have goals and have sub goals to them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be so singularly focused. We can look at both. We've already had things that were identified that we know that we needed to have goals on.
I would agree. If we could just revisit back to, and I gave a couple options. One was COVID lens, one was without COVID lens. The earlier point I talked about regarding with the COVID lens about our interaction with students and that instructional component being a daily occurrence or a more often occurrence. I'd like to work that into a goal of some kind, Dr. Pearson, if you want to think about how to phrase that as a goal. I don't know how it becomes a student achievement goal for your team in relation to instruction. I think this is still the right area for it. Do you have any feedback on that specifically?
Well, I think you're speaking about synchronous instruction in relation to kind of a remote learning setting. Is that the context that you're asking?
Not only synchronous, but just personal interactive. So if there's an instructional component. So a lot of the instruction, as most of us have kids in the district, we saw they was maybe a Khan Academy for math or something pulled off of YouTube for them to watch. I'd like to see teachers actually do an instructional component where they videotape themselves doing something or audio tape or what have you, and they send it then to their classroom. Some kind of actual instruction that they send to their classroom versus pulling out pieces. I mean, we did a great job. They did a great job. And that's why I say this with caution because we were responding, but we have some more time now to pre-plan. So I just would like to see that more for actual instruction with our students.
Yeah, so
we did hear that at CAC that it wasn't consistent. So there was this concern by families that if we were going into remote learning, that there would be more consistency with teacher interaction with kids.
Yeah, and maybe it did occur, just not consistently. Go ahead. Sorry, Dr.
Carolyn, are you talking in the context of remote learning or just in general?
I'm talking in the context of remote learning to put that COVID lens on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that our staff members and our students have given similar feedback about kind of that interactive component. I also just need to remind everyone that we are working within some pretty strict parameters related to remote learning from the state and also related in how those plans are written in coordination with our associations and ensuring that we're implementing best practice and blended learning. And so I certainly think if that's a goal that the board wants to establish, we have to provide that as a target with the understanding that there are many kind of moving components in the planning process for that. And that would be, I guess, the district work to try to put together.
Well, and I put it out to the board on just what their feedback is.
Well, I would say it's a theme that we're hearing, that people would like to have more of that. However, we also want to make sure that it's well balanced and well managed too, from both a teacher side, but also from what students are being asked to do and engage in. There are some places that are wanting people to sit on a face-to-face Zoom lesson from 7:30 to 2:30. Well, that's not realistic or reasonable for every student. Developmentally, that's not appropriate. So we want to make sure that all of those factors are taken into consideration as we.
Of course. And Carolyn, I agree with you. And I agree as well, Dr. Pearson, with what you've said. If we find ourselves in 100% remote learning, I'm still very hopeful and positive that we will be able to be creative and get our kids back in the building.
I think some of it was a platform issue as well for teachers. So I think that some of that was changing as time progressed. So I do want to see more direct instruction of that nature. However, I do know that some of that issue was just that this is something that was thrown at us without warning. And I think, I have multiple data points in my own house, and there was some variation. There was some where there was quite a bit of direct contact, and there was some where there was less of that. I think in all cases, I know that the students in my household were working. It was less than ideal, but I can tell you from the perspective of a teacher, my preference is to be able to interact and have that direct instruction. It makes instruction easier and really more meaningful for me to be able to actually interact with the students, know what it is they need to do. It's difficult to do on a computer screen, but it is certainly preferable. So I don't think the teachers will have too much issue with that either.
And we're looking at a variety of students. We had students who probably excelled in remote learning. We heard from Mom tonight about her concerns about her student. We have heard all kinds of things that this is just not the way we have wanted school to go. So it's really a piece of all of this is the relationship between the student and the teacher and the engagement with that relationship. And if as a board, we feel it's important for those relationships to be strong to increase achievement, I think we are sending a strong message to our staff that our community likes being with our staff, and that be part of the work that happens if we're working in remote.
Well said. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's kind of where I was getting at too. I, as a teacher, had some students who improved dramatically during that, and I had some that fell off. So it goes both ways.
I think we have to also be very careful with, what this can possibly do to our staff if we're expecting them to be teaching live and many of them have kids of their own that they're trying to walk them through their e-learning, and they might not be able to connect at certain times of the day. So I think there's a lot of logistical issues with having expectations of our staff to give live lessons. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not saying it's not beneficial to the students, but it's not as simple as just us saying, hey, this has to happen.
I agree. We have to really let our staff know that we're cognizant of all the aspects of teaching remotely from your home. Yes, I agree.
Hey, just to interject, Lori, I don't know if you saw the chat from Mr. Smith.
Hello. Okay. Ending the screen share. Oh, yes. Gotcha. Thank you. I will definitely do that. I will do that. I do have, actually, I'm going to stop share now. Thank you for that, Mr. Smith. I do have one just clarifying question. If you could all just give me a thumbs up or raise your hand. So are we all on board that as we go forward, we're going to start by looking at all of this as a startup for the year under the COVID lens, with the understanding that we're going to create a monitoring schedule and to go back and look in the fall or early winter, depending on how you all decide you want to go, to revisit and to possibly set new goals going forward. But I want to clarify and make sure you're all on board with that.
I think we have to either, if we're just going to do the beginning of the year, we won't be able to evaluate Dr. Pearson for the remainder of the year then. So I think, yes, we're going to have to set a timeline, because this is only going to get us to a certain point in the year.
Okay. So Jillian, you don't agree with this then?
No, I agree that if we're only going to talk about goals that'll get us through the beginning of the year, we have to set a timeline, and we have to make sure that we're coming back. We need to have a longer period of time to set goals for the remainder of the year as we go forward, because we won't be able to evaluate the superintendent or monitor progress on everything else that needs to happen in the district. Right. So I think it's really important that we're going to stick with that. I'm not sure why we can't do both at the same time, but that's in kind of just and move it as we need to. But if we want to just stick with that, then we've got to have an end point where we're having a meeting and we're really getting the rest of the year's goals in order.
I'm being cognizant of our time tonight. I know that, and I'm doing that under the framework of the amount of time that we have tonight. I'm always willing and able to come back, and we can. This doesn't have to be the end. This doesn't have to be the only workshop we do. We can do more, but I think with the, it depends what your priorities are right now. And it sounds like getting your year off to a good start if we focus there and we move forward from there. So going forward, so under student achievement and curriculum, some goals that may come out of that are identify instructional gaps, identify student progress, establish strategies to close the gaps, and promote interaction and engagement during remote instruction. Is there anything else anyone wants to add as priorities under student achievement and curriculum through the COVID lens?
One thing, I don't want to add anything about goals or anything like that, but one of the, I guess, threats that came up on this document is over testing. And that is a concern that I have. You know, I hear a lot of talk of iReady, and, you know, I want to make sure that our kids are not being over tested, and it's done in a way where we can get the data that we need, but they're still enjoying being in the classroom, and it's not all about data. So that is a concern that I have, and I thought it was really good to see that on our planning doc, and I hope that's something that's you know, that the staff is really thinking about as we make a plan.
Dr. Pearson, is there, to go along with that, because I agree with Mike on over testing being not a good thing for kids or students. Student work, teacher observation, I assume that that's part of our assessment data that we collect. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, it certainly is, but I think one of the things that we know about best practice in looking at student work is you've got to build reliability across classrooms, and the time it takes to do that kind of work at a standard that allows you to use it to inform whether or not students are meeting short-term growth targets is, I think, asking a lot for our staff as we return in the fall. I don't think that that's a reasonable data point. I think right now our recommendation is that we focus on using iReady. iReady is going to allow us to do comprehensive assessments at 2 points in time, at the beginning and the end of the first semester. We really can do them 3 times a year. So fall, winter, spring. And then it allows us to give monthly 10 to 15 minute probes that tell us whether or not a student is on track for improvement and meeting instruction, like the grade level instructional targets. So I think that's the data that we are hoping to collect in the fall. I think that's the most reasonable data for the short term to address these goals that we've identified. I don't disagree that those other data points are great to have. And I think that as we build our assessment strategies and catalog, that maybe we'll have additional data points to look at for students. But in the short term, we're gonna, if you want, like really quickly, where are the gaps? What are you doing to address them? Are students making progress? Then we need to hone in on a tool that gives us that data, like
I agree with that, with what Mr. Bryant said, with what Dr. Pearson is saying. This is something that's always been an issue for me, is over testing. And when we talk about going in the wrong direction, we've gone in the wrong direction with testing as well. And I'm just going to quote farmers: you don't grow a pig by weighing it. So we need to spend more time in the classroom with instructional time, as opposed to taking away from that for testing. That's what I thought was part of the purpose and one of the beauties of iReady. And that's what I'm hoping we can use it for, so that we can reduce some of that time taken away from actual instruction and allow the kids to actually learn.
Ms. Weibel has raised her hand. And if you all don't know where that is, if you go under participants, you can actually, if you go over your picture and you hover over your picture, oh, no, you can't raise your hand there. You can, under participants, find your name and you can raise your hand if you'd like to do that. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you, Lori. It's really hard with 10 of us. So I just started using that. I just wanted to highlight one thing also on the threat list before we move on to the next point. I know it's a long meeting, sorry. But I highlighted inequities. We've talked about inequities. And by inequities, I don't just mean race inequities. We do have those as well. But learning inequities, inequities in relation to disability, whether it's learning disability, physical disability, ADHD, etc. I was speaking with Mrs. Barker about it, and she talked with me about the educational equity educational position. I brought it up with our president's group, and 203 and 204, right? And Naperville's have had that for quite a while now, several years. It's been a very successful position for them to help them kind of focus on different groups of students that need help. So whether it's the IEP group of students, certain minority groups of students that need support, what have you, it's someone that comes in, and as you know, those of you in education, but as I learned, comes in and kind of assess where the support is needed and where really, first of all, where the issues are. I don't think that St. Charles has ever really looked at our demographics and sliced and diced it in the sense of where our issues are. I'd be very interested in this board looking to do that. I think it's necessary. I certainly, unfortunately, think we have a problem with that in our district. So I'd like to kind of put it out there. I did email Dr. Pearson and Mr. Manheim a couple weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago. I don't know, the time is different, flying, so about it. So I'm curious to know what the board thinks about an equity education position.
I think that speaks to programs, and I guess if we go further into programs and services.
Okay, so we can defer it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, Lori, I mean, what do you suggest? We talk about it now?
You know what? Nope. This is, if you're ready to move on to the next programs and services is next, actually. Are we ready to move on?
Student achievement, but we can move to this one.
It kind of straddles both, so I'm happy to defer it. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it impacts student achievement for sure. I do think that, we're hearing from different parties regarding issues of equity. And so I think that it would be something that could benefit the district as a whole, impact achievement, as well as some of the inequities we may be able to close that gap.
What I've seen with special ed in particular, myself, I mean, I hate to go back and quote Mrs. McCabe, but I think earlier in the year we talked about it being abysmal in certain areas, and we need to really look at that. The e-learning episode we've had has been, as we heard tonight, not only difficult, but impossible for families in special ed environments. We have to make that a priority, I believe, priority goal for this district, for us to work with families who have varying needs of special ed in their household, and come up with alternative solutions on how to work with them. For some of our kids that are mainstreamed, we have to educate our mainstream teaching population about what that looks like as well. So we have a lot of work to do in that area. It hurts my heart when I think about how much work we have to do. It doesn't mean we can't do it, but I'd like to figure out how we work that into a goal. It's hard to put a metric to that, honestly, but it needs to be worked on.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and transition, and we can always come back.
I thought we were in programs already. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. This is, I just wanted to share this screen so whoever's watching can also see this. The SWOT analysis you did under programs and services, the strengths, there are many. Before I move on, I just want to see if there's any that any of you wanted to add before I move on to weaknesses. If I can get my screen to move, there we go. And yeah, so you can take a look at weaknesses, and it looks like Ms. McCabe has raised her hand.
I was following up in terms of the equity issue and access. I would really like for us to have an audit from an outside source before we put anything definitely in place, so we know where the resources need to go. That comes from experience I had in the district where I worked. We had some real issues, and once we got the audit back, then we had a better sense of what we needed to do. And we did that here in D303 with special ed quite a while ago. We may need to add that to the list, but I think we have a lot of work, and it's good work to get done. And I would like to see before we start throwing, and I don't mean that derogatory, but that before we start putting into place answers, I think we need to see what is the reality going on in our district.
I've seen it work both, as you're saying, starting with sort of a needs assessment of that from outside firms or inside groups. Or additionally, already knowing, having data that suggests that there is an issue, and making, creating a position so that person can, in fact, do that needs assessment or bring in that needs assessment and be able to determine better than a different group might what needs to be put in place. Create a plan, because sometimes you can be given data, and if you're not accustomed to understanding how that plays out, issues of equity and social justice and how they play out on student achievement and culture within your district and buildings, then you may not really recognize what the problem really entails.
And that was why we did an outside audit, because they did focus groups and people were more honest with the outside folks than if it was somebody from within. We also found out a lot about our hiring practices. We found out a lot about how our curriculum was handled. I mean, there were so many aspects to access and equity that there was no way internally that we could do it. So that's my experience, was having an outside person group. It was actually 2 professors who came and did an extensive audit and presented it to the board to make decisions as to where they needed to go. That's just my experience, and it seemed to work well.
Let me go back to your opportunities, your weaknesses, threats. I noticed there's discussion about nursing support at each school, comprehensive SEL support structure, particularly the secondary level, consistent offerings across all learner groups, core subjects, courses need revamping. And then if we go down from weaknesses to opportunity, I'm sorry, there's a few more. You can take a look at that. Social emotional support has been called out a couple times here under weaknesses. Opportunities, tighten up programs and services for the general student population, community partnerships, equity and diversity, improve program evaluation, and you can read on from there. I see the North.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the weaknesses I just wondered about was nursing support at the schools. And I was under the assumption that we did have nurses at every school all day long. Is that accurate?
We do, yes. We have full-time nurses at all of our schools.
And that will continue next year, because we've also heard that from parents. So I just wanted to get if that was a weakness that we needed to address.
No, we have full-time nurses in all of our schools.
Any other weaknesses or threats do you see on that list that you would like to discuss as possible goals going into your next year?
I think having, you know, as you said, Ms. Grant, the SEL, that came up multiple times, specifically at the middle school and high school levels. So I would love to see some sort of goal to focus on that, whether it's, count the number of counselors, psychologists. These kids I have a feeling, are going to be coming back to school, and it's going to look very different. There are going to be a lot of emotional needs of these students that we don't know. We absolutely need to focus on that aspect of the students for next year.
We already have data on this one already. We have information from last October, as well as we have information on the recent survey that indicates the level of where our students are at for anxiety, depression, and so we do know where that level is. We also know that impacts attendance. So I feel like this is one that can have kind of a broad look with some sub goals where we do have some data already, so we can impact the depression and anxiety, especially at the secondary, and the attendance as well.
Carolyn Weibel.
Thank you. 2 points to Mrs. Barker's point about the attendance, the long term that we could roll this into, to our point about short-term lens with COVID, long-term lens in regard to the absenteeism, would be to improve the SEL, to put some sort of metric on it, to decrease that absenteeism rate in that 9 through 12. So our absenteeism rate, as we know, is in the 20%. So depending on which lens you look through, it can be 21 to 23%. And so, we could put a long-term metric on it down the line about the results of improving the SEL system by decreasing the absenteeism rate, just to give you an idea, Ms. Grand, about kind of where we're at with that. The other piece I would say is, to talk about special ed for a minute, we have staff that work very, very hard. They have it is a skeleton staff. So I'd like to make it a priority for the district to come up with just prioritize the structure and the program, and kind of figure that out a little bit more. I'm not sure how we put that together for them other than make it better. So I don't know how we do that for COVID, other than to say, how do we make it more comprehensive during this COVID time for special ed students? So I'll take any input from we have so many of you educators on the board, so jump on in with that, but I still think that's a priority we need to focus on.
Here's where I'm going to go. Again, when we're writing district goals, our idea is that we write an end. This is what we want to see. It is up to, it's Dr. Pearson and his team to come up with how. And so we have to stay out of how. We have to stay in what is the end result we are looking for. Not to say that having some good discussion about how isn't valuable and helps Dr. Pearson steer his team. We need to be writing goals. That's what.
Well, so the end, and that's what I mean. The end would be an easier time for our students. So I don't know how you quantify that as an end.
I think an end is we see a decrease. You hit on it earlier. We see a decrease in absenteeism in high school. And whatever we think that percentage is that is achievable in concert with Dr. Pearson. And then I think another end goal that I'm hearing collectively, and this is not just related to COVID, but I think we start under a COVID lens and the benefits continue after that, is how do we strengthen our social emotional learning as it relates to counselors, psychologists, all of those aspects.
I'd like us to tie it in somehow specifically just to that niche of students, but maybe I'm getting too finite.
I would like to go around the room, and I am going to ask each one of you if you could pick one or two priorities on this list, and I'm going to do this for the rest of our SWOT lists. If you could pick one or two priorities that you believe should be focused on right now, if you could just tell me what that is. And I'm going to go back and share the screen and go back to programs and services. All right, and see if I can highlight a few here. So let's start. Let's start with you, Mr. McNally. What would your priority be under programs and services?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. So I think we need to, again, take a look at how we're going to open the school. So that's my number one priority, is how are we going to open the school? But as far as what we want to actually measure, I like the idea of quantifying absenteeism. I think we need to make sure that as we do that, we are using, I know there are different ways that's measured. And in order to quantify it, we need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples longitudinally. Really taking a look at the curriculum that we have and making sure that we talked about, I think it might have been in a previous screen, talking about increasing or improving some of the core courses. So.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Nick? Mr. Mannheim.
I'll go back to kind of what Mike said when he started. I think this social emotional portion, I think it's going to be even more critical coming back from COVID. I think it's very important for us to focus on and have the support for the students. You know, every student's have had different experiences, you know, being at home with the e-learning. I think it's gonna be very important. It's an important topic anyways, but I think it's gonna be more important with us coming back if we stick to, you know, kind of looking at that COVID lens. So that'd be my
Thank you. Ms. Fairgrave.
From my standpoint, as I'd mentioned earlier, I think improvements from an attendance standpoint, I would like to see us target, and I think that transitions from the COVID lens and beyond. And then secondly, I would also agree with student supports, specifically the social emotional learning structure. How do we put more rigor around that? And for every student. And so what I would expand it a little further. There might be students out there that have not really felt or experienced a direct impact to COVID, for example, but they still are in desperate need of support in how they identify their career path because they're a senior and they are looking at how do I figure out where to go because now the college landscape has changed. So I would like to broaden that somewhat and that we have something in place for all of the students to address what their needs are. It's a difficult task.
Thank you. Ms. Barker.
I'm going to say that obviously the social emotional piece is the most important, but it has to be measured by something. You can't just say we all love social emotional learning. That's not working. So I think we need to say that, you know, we want to increase student attendance by a certain amount, and we need to decide what that amount is, not just at secondary, but we didn't have an issue at elementary level, and I don't remember middle school, but I remember it being secondary, but that we maintain the same level of attendance that we've had previously in elementary and secondary. And we need to look at disaggregated groups, for example, special education, and any other identified group that we can disaggregate to make sure that it's not just, it's not an overall, everybody's got to, this is an equity issue too. So everybody's got to be able to be attending school. I think we can get kids at school and keep them at school. I think that that's important. And so it's up to then Dr. Pearson to put, with his team, to put together the how are we going to get kids to maintain the attendance at school and to increase the attendance at the secondary level, and making sure that he puts together staff training and it continues, because I know some things were going to be in place already, and it may be looking at doing a needs assessment on secondary personnel that can support students. So those are the things that are the how. I want to stay in that area where, yes, it is SEL, but what are we measuring it by, and where, and what are our indicators?
Gotcha. Great, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Bryant. Mute.
As I mentioned earlier, I think the SEL supports lowering ratios of social workers, counselors, maybe even caseloads for special ed. I think will all are all really important to focus on. Again, those are the supports the kids are going to need, because again, they are not coming back to the same schooling that they had in the spring. So we are going to have those supports in place, and if that means adding extra supports, then I think that needs to be the focus of our goal. One other thing I want to add is I've heard a lot of people mention attendance, and I see this as being a major issue with tracking attendance for next year. We are going to have times of remote, maybe possibly times of remote learning and in-person learning. I think we all learned that tracking attendance during remote learning was there's no real good way to track attendance. I don't believe so. That's going to be very difficult. Also, I think we're going to see a lot of of parents keeping their kids home for multiple reasons. So using attendance as a metric next year, I'm not saying there is not a way, but I see it being very difficult to track attendance next year.
Thank you. Ms. McCabe.
I'm leaning more to the social emotional, but for that, I think it's about engagement and how well the kids are engaged with the learning, which I believe will improve learning and will improve attendance. But we have had a lot of discussion about trauma-informed instruction. We know that we just have gone through a pretty significant situation. So there are kids who worried about their parents, their health, whether they were going to be able to eat. I think there are a lot of issues that have impacted our kids that we don't know yet. So my feeling is whatever we need to do at that level, so the kids feel that they belong and that they want to learn and they are engaged. I'm not against getting more counselors, but I think that we all know that that relationship with the teacher is so critical. But I also think that we need to also look at our staff. They were overwhelmed. And I think it was Mike pointed out that they have kids at home. They worried about their health. They worried about our kids. I think each one of us have stories from our families about teachers at 11:30 at night, 2 in the morning, sending emails to get to kids. So I think that for this short period of time coming, I am so hoping that we will be able to do face-to-face because our teachers know how to do that. If we don't go face-to-face, I think this is going to be significant. The kids are going to want to be back in front of teachers. And how are we going to do that to strengthen their emotional and social needs? When I think of just the beginning of school, I think we have to just really look at what we need to do to support kids as they are coming back into school and having gone through the experience we have. But I also want that we have to look at our teachers and our administrators who did incredible work, and how do we keep them safe and healthy as well.
Thank you. Carolyn, and then Ed, you'll be last.
Thanks. I would try to quantify the participation and balance that with your attendance. So in an e-learning environment, our participation was in the 80s, in the 86 percentile, around that in the spring. That is below what I would consider average. And so I'd like to see us try to quantify a number that would be higher if we're in an e-learning environment. And so that's what I would consider as a measurement. And then balance that with the decreasing the absenteeism rate. And to Mr. Bryan's point, I hear what you're saying, but I think we don't have a choice but try to get in touch with our student population and try to, get quantitative data on whether they're either participatory, either electronically if we're in that environment, whether it's part-time or full-time, or they're physically in their chairs, or if there's not, then we have to come up with a category as to why and whether they're participating in their academics in a different environment then. So it's going to be some creative, data collection, but I think with effort, we can do that and then come up with some data as to how we're doing on that. I certainly think there's room for improvement there. I agree with Mrs. Barker and her satisfaction, or her different groups of I can't remember the big word you used. Sorry, Jillian.
Disaggregation.
What's it called?
Disaggregated groups.
Yeah, disaggregated groups. Basically, I would want to quantify the satisfaction of those groups, right? So you want to do some sort of survey and quantify what their satisfaction is in relation to what our service is. So whether it's special ed or if it's a different group that you're working with, how is the service in relation to the relationship with D303? And then I'm taking, it's is nice about going at the end. I get to take all your bits and pieces and add to it. And then to Mrs. Fairgreave's point, I do agree. There's a component of dealing with SEL and CCR and doing some sort of survey in that when you're talking with upper level juniors and seniors, 11 and 12th graders, or even not even, 9 through 12, if you're looking at certain students that are already planning. There's a lot of apprehension and anxiety in what your post high school K through 12 life will look like nowadays. How do I go about it? I mean, there's many of us out there currently chasing ACTs because they're all booked and nowhere to go. So I think surveys and assessments are certainly, or some sort of, assessment that way is certainly the way to go. When we did the SEL survey, I think that was really helpful. If we could do a survey in person, you certainly would get a higher level of participation than if we're doing surveys at home again. It really all depends on what what everything looks like in the fall. So I kind of just stole everything and wrapped it up. So
Thank you, Ms. Weibel. And Mr. McNally.
I actually went first, but I do want to clarify.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's right. You've already talked. Go ahead.
I can clarify the one point that when we talked about attendance, and Mr. Bryant kind of probably said it more succinctly than I did. I want to make sure that when we're comparing attendance, if we're going to do this for some sort of evaluative purpose, we have to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. And attendance for online is certainly done very differently. But even when you're talking about in-person school, there are different ways to measure attendance, and I want to make sure that all of that's done in the same manner so that it's a true and honest evaluation.
So Dr. Pearson, I want you to weigh in. The two things that stuck out to me, of course, and all of you spoke to this, was the social emotional learning. And a goal that has come to me is providing comprehensive, grade appropriate social emotional support and structures for all students and staff, or all students. But that would be a high level board goal. And then around the attendance piece, I'm hearing to increase student engagement and decrease student absenteeism. I'll let you guys wordsmith that. But Dr. Pearson, what are your thoughts?
I think actually both of those are right in line with some of the thinking that we have as a district. Interestingly enough, as we put together our task force for return to school, we actually pulled out social and emotional learning and well-being, student and staff well-being as a separate committee, because that we felt that was such an important part for us to think about during transition. And that's not happening everywhere across the state as people are putting their groups together. So I think it certainly is something that we see as a need and a priority, and I would like to be able to roll that into addressing the goal. And of course, attendance was something that we had already identified as something we wanted to work on, and it certainly is an indicator of both engagement, but also student connectedness at school.
Right. So going into, under the COVID lens, the social emotional and absenteeism and engagement would be the priorities under programs and services. Of course, revisiting that once we get over the hump of starting out school. All right, so if you're all in agreement, does anyone have any other thoughts around programs and services before I move on?
I would still, as Mrs. Barker said, I'd still like to focus on our groups specifically. So I don't know if she wants to wordsmith that. She's excellent at that.
I mean, I certainly can work to do that. I think we're running out of time. And it's something that we're not going to get finished tonight. But I will definitely draft. I can definitely draft something and send it out. If that, I have to finish something else I need to send out too. So it's certainly, I feel very comfortable. I've written a few goals in my lifetime.
I think probably a lot of you on that board have done that. All right, so we're going to move on to the SWOT analysis of facilities. And for the sake of time, I'm actually going to read through these, and then we're going to go right around back to the round robin. And if you have something that you want to add to this, but also what your priorities would be, because I know you've all had time to look at this. So for the sake of our audience, I'm just going to share these. The strengths: stayed ahead of problems and have had plans that keep our buildings and grounds in great shape. New middle school is fantastic. Yet we've also met the needs of the other middle schools. Equity has been considered. Secure facilities studying being conducted, well-maintained and clean. We've seen that a couple times. Again, the facility study, high school fields, capital improvement planning process, budgeting and responsive to needs, 10-year life and safety, finances, and again, the buildings are safe. Weaknesses. The board has been working blind without the facilities audit. Decisions have been made based on personal insight instead of evidence. Overcrowding at some schools. Learning spaces outdated and inequities at some schools. Architectural services. Facilities have some weaknesses, and you can read that there. We have one set of primary immediate buildings, which messes up boundaries for elementary. Now one of our middle schools is packed to the point of not having enough lockers. You can read on there. A high school's been added so many times that not so great. It looks kind of like a fun house inside. The age of the buildings and lack of consistency in resources. Then we have opportunities. Facilities plan. This board can set in motion a 5 to 10-year plan that will support instructional practices, updating learning spaces, elementary schools, high school classrooms, organization of staffing in facilities. Hopeful that through facilities and programs, we can make leveled plan that spans several years. Student geographical logistics. And last, the COVID-19 situation is an opportunity to roll up our sleeves and take a good look at how the building look in terms of basic resources and make that investment. And then threats: the community has an opinion without necessarily having evidence. Important that the board administrator communicate well, as the community can see and understand the vision of the future. Decrease in revenues to maintain is the threat. Current fiscal climate, COVID-19, community members not seeing eye to eye, and community pushback. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I would like to go around, and again, you tell me your thoughts and what your priority when it comes to facilities is. And we'll start with you, Ms. McCabe.
We need to have a really good facilities utilization audit plan completed in a timely manner. And I think then that's going to help us to make decisions that are ahead of us. I do want to make sure that I believe that our buildings look really good. I think our operations and maintenance have done an outstanding job with some old buildings. And I don't want that to, even though there are buildings that have needs, I think we've had an outstanding focus on keeping our buildings going. But for me, it's about the facilities audit and getting that information and communicating that well with the board and with the community, so we know what to do next.
Thank you. Ms. Weibel. Mute.
You know, in relation to the goal, I really just think it's, we need to see what the facility utilization plan has to say as to where our areas of focus need to be. And I worry about our the inequality of kids in buildings. So I'm curious to see what the facility utilization plan will have to say. In the next, in the COVID era, I think our buildings with more kids is going to be a concern. So we'll have to be very thoughtful of how we accommodate all that.
Thank you. Mr.
But it's not a
McNally.
goal. Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you.
I think I was up. Is that me?
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
McNally.
I really probably the two things for me would be age and safety of buildings. And again, that's going to come out in the building audit, I think. But the other that was brought up by someone else on the screen there was we have the 1 K-2, 3 through 5 situation that causes a kind of always not just an inequity issue, with the way those kids are being educated, but there's also the issue that logistically the K-2 building accommodates more students. So by necessity, that K-2 building is always going to be pretty much, it can't be fully utilized, and the 3 through 5 is always going to be at max utilization, because logistically, the larger feeding into the smaller just doesn't work. So I think that's something we need to probably consider as we look at the facilities as well.
Thank you. Ms. Fairgrave.
From a longer term standpoint, I think the facility utilization plan is key. We'll likely have to have further discussions once we have the results of that to prioritize based on how it fits with our district values and other goals that we want to accomplish. From a COVID lens standpoint, I think it is critical that we be prepared to make investments with the new standard related to health and safety that will be required of us in our schools. And again, I think it's a great opportunity to get all of the buildings up to the same standard.
Thank you. Ms. Barker.
I honestly don't think we should be looking to write a goal in this area just yet, because we are waiting for that facility. This is really just we need to have that facilities utilization plan to us in, I believe, was it January we were supposed to get it of this year? Was it when? Yeah, okay, January. And so at that point, then I think we can start to set some goals around that. Obviously, as Mrs. McCabe said, our buildings are clean and safe, and from that standpoint, they look good. So they're safe places. But we do, if we want to talk about areas of focus, once we do get that plan, things we have to address right away are some of our schools are getting very full. And so that begins to become a health issue. And how do we address that with the facilities? And then also there are inequities among, especially among the elementary schools. We have varying facilities, and not every facility is supportive in all capacities, for that 21st century learning that we're looking for. So I think those are just areas of focus, but I don't know that we have something to set right now in this area because we're going through such a big process.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Bryant.
With COVID, we really need to focus on I feel, how kids are going to be moving about the buildings, and also, as Ms. Fairgrave mentioned, I think we are going to have to be ready to make some significant investments into providing a safe facilities for the kids, whether it's, and again, I don't know exactly what this might be, but, sneeze guards, drinking fountains, how are kids going to be moved in and out of the cafeteria? How are we going to be able to continue to maintain social distancing if that's a requirement for these students. So I think there's a lot of unknowns with what is going to be required of us. But I think that's what's on my mind. How are we going to be able to make sure that the students are safe and we're following all guidelines.
Thank you. And Mr. Mannheim.
Well, I think everyone kind of hit on it. I think it's hard to quantify a goal right now without the facilities plan. But from the COVID lens, kind of echoing Heidi and Mike, I think we have to be prepared to make investments into all of our schools, for touchless soap dispensers, faucets, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of the short-term COVID lens, and then long-term goals, as many other board members said, once we get the facilities plan, we'll revisit that, because there'll probably be a lot of things that'll lead to further discussions based on what the architects find.
Thank you. Mr. Pearson, your thoughts? I'm sorry, Dr. Pearson.
I think everything's been said. We're in the middle of a major facility study. I think that's going to inform, decisions going forward. I think in the short term, we do need to make some investments in just some safety kind of processes in our buildings so that students and staff can return to school safely as we think about the COVID situation.
So a COVID goal around facilities might be invest in building requirements, building adjustments required based on CDC or county health department guidelines, that kind of a thing. If you're going to create a goal, if you believe that is something you want to do. So is there anything else? Does that sum it up until we get to later in the year? Okay. Are we ready to move on to our next critical subject here, which is, district finance. So same round robin, strengths of district finance. We're in great shape, lowest tax rate in the county, highest financial rating, lowest debt in the state, and have a rainy day fund. We have a lot to be proud of. Balanced budget, financial recognition, little debt, cash flow, high fund balance, long-term planning. I'm part of the board. I'm just looking for things that haven't already been said. Strong audit reports and reserves. Weaknesses. Whoops. Sorry, my computer is not cooperating. There we go. Weaknesses. If we lose our current administration, will this board know what to do? Could we really negotiate with our teachers or plan for the future? The fund balance is out of range. At this time, don't see any weaknesses with finance. I think some has been spent in ways that need to have more focus on core curriculum and SEL support. Community pushback. There must be constant recognition and focus on today's economic climate. With this focus, it is very possible that what once might be financially supported should be reconsidered. Some opportunities. How do we use the strength to build our student learning? How do we market our school district, the community with such a great financial standing? Potential for borrowing if needed. Align fund balance and recommended policy. Long-term facility improvement planning. Pending debt retirement over the next few years. And we have an opportunity to focus on facilities and programs needs for study in core and SEL. And then threats, uncertainty, of course, of the state's financial situation, lost revenue, unemployment, economy, potential pension cost shift, financial instability at the state level, the timing of the state payments, unforeseen crisis and recession, and then losing sight of the board determined strategy for the next 12, 18 months. This should guide all of our expenditures. So all of that being said, going to stop sharing and we will start again with Ms. McCabe.
I was hoping to hear some other ideas first.
We can come back if you'd rather.
No, I think we've just done such a great job financially being stewards of our taxpayer money. I think the concern is the uncertainty with the state, which isn't a huge impact to us, but could be an impact to our families, and which would impact us as well. So in terms of a goal, it would be great if we could still maintain the level that we're at, meeting the needs of kids and having that reserve so we can use it if there is a crisis. I don't know that I don't have a real specific goal. I think if we could fix the state, that would help, you know.
Good luck with that. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. McNally.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute there. Obviously, as with everybody, the uncertainty is a big issue, and there's nothing we can really do about that except kind of sit and wait. In the interim, though, the other kind of overarching concerns I've generally had are our fund balance is outside our parameters. I would like to maintain a fund balance given things that have occurred at the higher end of the parameter, just so that we have kind of that rainy day fund. But I want to make sure we're taking into account, you know, the taxpayers as well, because of these uncertain times with many of them. We don't want to be collecting taxes to maintain a fund balance that's higher than we need. And my general focus is always on teachers and instruction as opposed to buildings. So I'd rather more of our money go in that direction than on buildings. Because whatever building you're in, you still need to have competent, qualified, quality teachers, and I'd like to maintain the ones we have.
Thank you. Ms. Fairgrave.
First of all, to echo some of the earlier sentiment, I think in our district, we are very fortunate that we're in the financial position that we're in, especially when you compare to other districts within our state and the environment that we're moving into. What I would like to see is that our expenditures are really supported by whatever our strategies are that we agree to. So whether that be additional support for teachers, whether that be additional counseling supports, or whether it's something related to the infrastructure to make our buildings meet whatever the standards are for COVID. I would like to see our expenditures in this time period really be able to be aligned and point back to this is how it supports the strategy that we have to accomplish in the next several months.
Thank you. Ms. Barker.
I think some similar things that have already been said, you know, maintain the balance, but keeping in mind, you know, our taxpayers are giving us their money, and because we said we needed it. So making sure that we're not out of balance, and utilizing those funds to make sure that we are at this time, you know, staying focused on those classes, and the SEL, and as you said, Heidi, what we've agreed upon, and making sure that we're aware of things that might be in the cooker before they get to presentation, so that we know what money is going to be spent on, and there are not surprises throughout the year. I mean, obviously, this is an area of strength for us, so the concerns aren't that great. I know the community is concerned because they hear a lot of things on the news and they automatically equate it to our situation, and it doesn't describe our situation necessarily. So I would think that a goal needs to be, you know, continuing to maintain the fund balance, and then making sure we're sticking to kind of those agreed upon things, at least for this year. Maybe not, you know, big dreams, but narrow focus.
Great, thank you. Ms. Weibel.
Yeah, for related to the COVID, the short-term goals, I mean, I would agree with some of the sentiment that's been shared. We have to adjust our spending budget to reflect the need for our health and safety for in relation to COVID, obviously, and for the staffing changes that are going to need to come, whether it's more teachers, so we have a safer environment for our students that are spread out, or facilities to reflect the same, as we've discussed kind of throughout the evening here. I would agree we need to spend those monies more pinpointed for that specific need. When we set the fund balance, I don't even remember when it was, like 10 or 15 years ago. It was probably 10 years ago. It was set in a recovery. So when we said it was, it's between 28 and 36, right, Dr. Pearson? Something like that. We're currently in a recession now. So I'd like to see the board review or get a recommendation from our CFO and from the administration as to whether that's the right even fund balance area now that we're in a recession. So what do the numbers say? What's the analysis say? What's the recommended, gosh, I can't think, it's getting too late. What's the recommended kind of slot we should be in for a fund balance? Is it too high now? I mean, we're already past the high end of it. Should it even be lower? Because when it was set, like I said, the economic climate was very different, and now we're going to be in a recession for a while. So I'm not even sure that what we have set in our policy is going to be the accurate place for us to be as a goal. So I guess we have to do some analysis on it, and I'd like to hear from our administration if that's even appropriate for the next 6 months goal. So I see Mrs. Fairgrave shaking her head, so appreciate that.
Yeah, no, just to jump in quickly, no, I definitely agree. And I've had the same thought as well, that we need to reevaluate what's in policy, and the target for the fund balance, it may not be appropriate today.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Bryant.
Yeah, a lot of my thoughts have already been said, so I'll try and keep it short here. The uncertainty of what's going to happen with state funding, with the economy as a whole, does concern me. So I think an area of focus for us is to sort of really make sure that new programming that is not essential for students is sort of, status quo is okay for me for the next six months to a year. And we really need to focus any spending on getting these kids back to where they need to be, and making sure that the resources are being put towards students, whether it's SEL supports or more teachers or facilities to improve facilities for the students.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Mannheim.
Like, that's the good part of going last. It's easy. I kind of echo, fund balance, bringing us back into the range. But then I also do agree with, Heidi and Carolyn's comments about, it's probably a good time for us to look and see if we're in a good range, or do we need to adjust that range? What is our board policy? So I would agree with kind of what everybody else was saying on fund balance.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Mr. Superintendent Pearson, any other thoughts there?
No, I think what's been said captures it.
Great. Great. Thank you. Hey, you all are doing great. We're down to our last SWOT analysis, and you're walking away with some goals right now. And I'm encouraged by that. I hope you are as well. The last piece that you, oh gosh, where did it show? All windows, there we go. The last piece that you analyzed was your community and district relations. And You can see the strengths there. Families and community love our schools and teachers, created ways for more voices to be heard. Board is keen to having a good sense of how we are valued by the community. We've become transparent, creation of the CAC, messaging, communication during COVID crisis, meals for the community, dedicated staff, members focused on communications, the website, changing up the board committee to include a citizens advisory, lots of communication mediums available. There are a lot of individual district employees that represent the district in an excellent manner when communicating and resolving concerns, and then district communication has improved. All right. And then weaknesses, reactive communication, still lacks sufficient communication channels and transparency. Superintendent may not be out in front as the face of the school district, needs to be interfacing with the community frequently, being more empathetic and compassionate, timeliness of communication, communication between the board and all the stakeholders is not always consistent. We often only hear from the same people, need to have a broader base of insights and information from our community. Opportunities, proactive communication in multiple channels, citizen advisory committee, clarifying goals and trying to work the goals. This is the year for the superintendent to sell himself in our district and the initiatives with the facilities and program study, and then consistent communication. If you're going on, COVID creates an opportunity to strengthen the communication strategy. With CAC now in place, the board has one way to hear from varied voices. The various crises we are experiencing as a nation and community, there should be ways that we can listen and learn from our stakeholders. And we have an opportunity to plan ahead and deepen our commitments. And then threats, rumors about district initiatives, community expectations, social media. The super and SLT help themselves understand the needs and wants of the community. And then the dreaded social media monster. The uncertainty of times will make it difficult to know how to move forward. So there's a lot there. Again, I would, for sake of time, let's go around robin. If someone's already said it, you don't necessarily have to repeat it. If you have something new to add to it, but let's see where you're at here. And I'm gonna mix it up this time. Let's start with Mr. Bryant.
Okay, well, I think to me, communication and partnerships are key here. We need to make sure that we are communicating and letting the community know what we're doing, what we're planning, how we're doing it. Timelines, I think, is a very important step. Also, communicating and partnering with the teacher organizations, the support staff. We need to be working with them to make sure that their input is heard in any decisions moving forward to get back to school and so forth. So again, communication and partnerships. I know it's always been something that we've focused on, but I think there needs to be even more of a focus on it in the next 6 months.
Thank you. Carolyn, Ms. Weibel. Mute. You're muted.
Sorry, I said I knew you were going to come to me next. I was just about to Google a quote. It's fine. There's a quote that's something about like, there's no communication, no bad communication, there's no such thing as bad communication because of over communication or something like that. I can't think of what the quote is, but basically it means that you can never communicate something too many times and have it be bad. I don't remember what the quote was, but that's the gist of it. And so, I mean, we've certainly improved our communication. My point is there's always improvement in the concept of communication. So it's very hard to kind of set goals for communication because you can always do better at it. In my opinion, coming from communications as a background. So I certainly think the one piece we can continue to do is consistent communication. I have to think about how to make that quantitative. So don't know the answer to that right now. I'm sorry, but
That's fine.
I was the one that put, I'm going to claim it, the dreaded social media monster, because I think part of that is my frustration with the inconsistency. We might communicate something on Twitter, but not on Facebook, on our website, but not on one of those. I think for our district, I would like to see a streamline between Dr. Pearson, the district. You know, we're working on, he's working on his communication independently as the superintendent and kind of the face of the district. I'd like to see the board do it as well. I'd like to see the district do it as a whole. I'd like to see us do it to, you know, blast it out to parents and to community and have it all be in the same medium and the same format. So, you know, I'm an over communicator. We always hear from the same voices on the board. I'm probably one of those voices. So,
You know, and I do want to make sure when you think of community engagement, communication is absolutely vital. But with the engagement, it's a two-way conversation. So I just want you to also remember that it's not you sending information out all the time. It's also what are you getting back, and what is that engagement and that two-way communication.
Right. And so I think about that. So like we've only had the coffees. You know, how do we have the Let's Talk? So how do we have more forums? How do we have more opportunities? We have the CAC, but are our CAC members really available to our community members? I'm not sure our community members know that the CAC is meant for them to go to the CAC members, give their input, and then the CAC members come to us. I think they just think that a CAC member is a chosen one. And so, you know, part of that is us explaining that. And then in helping educate / train our community on how we use these representatives. So as that kind of two-way communication, because it is difficult to hear from 50,000 people all at once. So how do we hear from our 50,000 people through our you know, representatives? So
okay, thank you.
There's no goals in any of what I just said. I'm so
no,
sorry.
there are some goals in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's getting past my bedtime, so I am not productive.
We're doing great. Ms. Fairgrave.
To Mr. Bryan's earlier point, I think under the COVID lens, I think communication and engagement two-way is key. We have our citizen comments, which is one way of partnering with the community and getting comments. We also have Let's Talk as well. I think if we do any type of surveying related to COVID-19 and future environments, that's another way that we're going to be able to use to have engagement from the community. I'd also like to see us have consistent communication strategies. Ms. Weibel brought up the coffees. I thought that those were very well attended, but they kind of, you know, fell off the grid. Partially due to COVID, but how do we get something like that back on track with this new environment? And most importantly, then how do we action the items that we receive from the coffees? How do we bring it back to the board, and how do we then action what has been recommended or comments and so forth? And then also to Ms. Weibel's point as well, if we communicate on Twitter, we should be doing it on Facebook. We should have a consistent number of communication channels.
Thank you. Ms. Barker.
I mean, I guess I can kind of reiterate some of the same things that have been said. I think this year we really focused on increasing that two-way dialogue. Unfortunately, yeah, we were cut off a little bit on that. But as you can see, the inconsistency in where we are communicating what information and how we are communicating it, I really feel like that needs to be analyzed, because there have been a number of complaints, not just recently, but throughout the year about, I missed that, I didn't see that, I don't know that, where is that? And so I think that that's what, you know, we're all kind of saying is, let's get very consistent about it. Let's streamline our communication methods, because, you know, the way a parent has to sign up for example, for a document that might come out from a school. There might be things coming out from the PTO in a different venue than you're getting, something else from the school. Then it's in the virtual backpack, and then you miss things that way. I think there needs to be some analysis work on that and streamlining that process, not just for our parents, but actually for the community too. And I know that is, not for lack of trying. We are trying to engage with the community. We're trying to make sure they have the information consistently. And I'm saying we as the district, I think it may not necessarily be working to get the messages or get critical information out there in a way that it can be received. So I think some work along those lines would be good. And then continuing, obviously, to use the CAC. We really just got the ball rolling this year. And of course, we went into this remote world. So if we continue along that path of really making that two-way engagement to really benefit the district as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. McCabe.
Anxiety is really high right now, and it's going to be until we have a consistent, or we know what we're going to do. So my sense is that the way we communicate for COVID and now, starting now, may look different than what we have traditionally done. And I'm not sure I'm not sure that any school district knows how to communicate at the best level in this kind of environment. So I think that I would request that administration look to how do we get information out, even if it isn't complete, so that families are sensing that there is work going on, that there is an understanding of the anxiety that's out there. We heard tonight from two parents who were like, what is going on? What do we need to do? And I don't know anything I don't have the evidence that we're not doing communication or what social media we're using. This is in the weeds, but I think what I would like to see is that we have a dialogue with people in the community about how we communicate. We have different stakeholders who aren't on social media. We have families who are working too much. They're not going to read Facebook or Twitter. Is it something that we need to consider at the building level? At least for the COVID piece of this, I think we have to do more in untraditional ways. I think every school district has to, because the anxiety is so high now for families and kids. And that is not to say that we haven't improved in our communication or that we've missed anything. I don't want that to be the message here. I think we're just in a really different era. And I think we have to figure out how to do this differently in this particular era. And I will say, Dr. Pearson has heard this over and over again. He did a magnificent job on that video. And it warmed people's hearts. And maybe some of that is more what we need, rather than just pictures, but more who we are as a district as we go through this whole approach. So anyway, I agree. There needs to be a approach to this, but my focus would be before school starts, families they're already trying to figure out if they should buy school supplies. I've heard that from my family. And so I think the more we can give them, even if it isn't complete, we'll give them some sense of that the work is going on.
Thank you. Nick and then Ed.
Sure. I think as it was kind of said, improving, right? We can always improve. I think we took a lot of good strides this year in our communication. Someone mentioned, it might've been you, Lori, about the back and forth, right? Also what we received. I think launching the Let's Talk was a good thing. And I think that was helpful. So I think we just continue to make improvements, right? We learn as we continue to evolve. And then kind of sharing the same sentiments as people. I think communication is going to be imperative, as we heard tonight. In the next 9 weeks, people are going to want to know what's going on, and they're going to want to have kind of a regular updates, and things are going to change as we get more information. But I think that's going to be the big key for us as a school district, is keeping parents informed on what's going to happen, so they have a better idea. I think we're all still going to have some unsureness to it because of the situation, but I think that's going to be the key to is sharing. Maybe it is, I think someone said oversharing, but I think that's going to be the key to with the COVID lens.
Thank you. And Mr. McNally.
Okay, I'm going to slightly disagree on over communication, just because when you over communicate, sometimes it turns into static. And so I want focused communication. I'm not suggesting we aren't complete. I just don't want to have, we're on phase, something that's 3 or 4 steps. You're going to hear more of this tomorrow, and you're going to hear more of this tomorrow. We need to have focused communication so people can actually digest it, because we have to remember we're not the only entity they're receiving information from. And we just need to make sure we're timely with our communication. Sometimes the biggest problem with communication is kind of the illusion that it's actually occurred. We need to make sure that it's focused and that it's directed at what we need people to know. And we're not, as an example, if you get 4 emails a day from the same, from District 303, at some point you start saying it's probably the same thing, and you just kind of begin to ignore it. So I want to make sure that we're focused and timely in our communication.
Thank you. So the goal that I'm hearing come out from all of you, and by the way, well, I'll come back to that. Reevaluate and streamline venues and environments for consistent, timely, focused communication that engages all stakeholders in this crisis. Or you can get rid of in this crisis. Does that encapsulate?
Can I just add one more thing that I jotted a quick note down as well. The one thing I want to make sure all the stakeholders in the community know is that we do have the CAC, we do have the coffees, we have those other great ways for them. Those are additional ways. I don't want them to lose sight of the fact that direct communication with board members is also a great idea, and sometimes the most efficient manner.
Thank you all. I have,
Sorry, I did put on the chat, which I guess we aren't supposed to use, maybe.
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay. Just the communication follow through is a quantitative measurement, if we want to put a quantitative on there. So if we want to measure the follow through.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. So our time, we have 10 minutes left. So the goal was to get through all of this SWOT analysis and determine your priorities from that analysis, which you have done around the COVID lens, clearly with the understanding that you're going to come back to this. However, so I'm going to leave this up to you. I'm going to share, let me get to that. What would be next? And I'm thinking this is going to have to be a homework assignment. Let me go through this. Homework assignment for all of you I'm so sorry. We don't need to do that. There we go. For all of you, what I'm going to do is, it's getting late for me as well, everyone. My apologies. Let me get to the right slide. There we go. I've taken a lot of notes, and I'm going to take your thoughts in my notes and send them back to you. And whether you know it or not, you've created some nice pieces for goals. And it's very important that if you're not familiar with SMART goals, a SMART goal is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and being able to measure it is the big piece. I know several of you have spoken to that tonight. So I'm going to send back to you all of your thoughts and some possible goals. And I believe in perhaps in an open meeting, in your next meeting, you can carry on and perhaps Dr. Pearson, we can decide you can come forward with these goals and or have another special meeting if you wish to continue this. I hate to go past 8 o'clock because I think that we start to fade a bit, but I do want to call out, and you all have this in your hands right now, this monitoring schedule. And this may not apply as far as the way this is worked out because of your approach to having this COVID-19 lens first and then coming back to visit it. But you need to create a monitoring schedule and determine when you want these goals to be met, or when you want to revisit them and find out where you're at in each of those goals. Then, and once you've done that, you can determine, set up a time when you're going to revisit the goals and get into maybe more long range, more strategic type planning goals. Right now, it was around the COVID lens, which is more immediate, more current, more in the next 6 months. But I definitely recommend that you go back as a board, determine how you're going to monitor it, set timelines for that, what the performance indicators are for that. But the main goal tonight was to have goals, and you actually have accomplished that. And I'm going to send what you've done to you in the next day or two, and then, but you still have some work to do. I'm happy to stay on if you want to continue this conversation, but I recommend that this continues in your next board meeting or in a special meeting.
I'm going to make a suggestion.
Yes, ma'am.
You've got the notes, you've got all the base for the goals. Our next board meeting are we meeting in July, right?
Mm.
And it's a retreat.
Oh.
So there's quite a bit to do, but as the secretary and I'm quite familiar with writing SMART goals, seeing as though I write IEPs. Would you want me to draft something, I can talk to Dr. Pearson, put some indicators down, get us just to a place where we have something to talk about and tweak in July, because our time frame is getting shorter and shorter.
Yes, it is.
I think we identified our values, our priorities. We just need to kind of put it in the right words. I'm willing to do that.
Wow. Board, your thoughts?
I'm good with that. One concern I have though, and I'm going to guess, Dr. Pearson, you have a basic idea as to what our goals are. If there's anything that you need to start acting on in that time, go ahead and do that to start planning. I would hate to sit here and wait a month before any action happens on some of these goals if it's necessary for any planning to start now.
Well, I can just say that all of these areas are in motion right now anyway. So I think, we're not waiting for the goal to be finished.
I am certainly happy to have Ms. Barker do that as long as nobody asks me to do the writing, right? But I just want to make sure she's not double doing the work. That's kind of what I thought you were going to do. So I don't want to force her to do work that is already being done by you, Lori.
Well, I'm going to be sending all the information on, and you know, I don't wordsmith. I'm just using your words. I did a little bit tonight, but I'm gonna, like I said, encapsulate all your thoughts tonight and send it your way, and then you take it from there. If this were a regular live workshop and it was the 4 to 6 hour workshop, we would walk out with goals, with indicators, with that would be the mission. But it's a unique situation right now. So this is a great and important conversation, but I think in the environment we're in right now, which isn't normal, if Ms. Barker is willing to do that, and I will send that to all of you, you will all get the same information.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think it's important to have a deadline so people know when they have to report out. So maybe Dr. Pearson, you can say, hey, you know, this is when we need it. So so we can backward map so if Mrs. Barker is going to spend time putting this together and then everybody looks at it, you need to be prepared to do that discussion or whatever. I think a timeline for us so people know when things are due would help streamline. And Jillian, if you need help, I'm happy to help.
From the district perspective, it would be nice to have something by the kind of the end of the month, close of July, in a final draft form, because we do use this to help plan our administrative leadership team retreat, which happens at the end of July, our senior leadership team retreat, which happens at the beginning of July. So, but I'm assuming I have enough information from what you shared tonight to kind of start thinking big picture. And I think that whatever Ms. Barker provides will certainly help solidify that.
Well, and I think, Dr. Pearson, you and I can touch base maybe next week and just kind of, you know, talk about some of those indicator pieces and make sure that, you know, what I write makes sense to what is reasonable. And so that there's some connection between that as well. So yeah, I think Becky, as far as Mrs. McCabe, as far as timeline goes, definitely, I think next week I'll be able to kind of write out we'll have it done by this date, then take a look at that and be ready to talk about it at July 13th to finalize.
So a July 1 deadline?
Are you going to need feedback from us before the July 1st, right? So it wasn't, my comments actually weren't anything about you when you would get it done. It's when we as board members get it back to you with comments.
The question is, do you want to, I guess, do you guys want to finalize at the July meeting, or do you want to have the discussion about the draft at the July meeting? So that if
I would like to finalize at the next board meeting,
okay,
so that we're ready.
All right, so then I'll set a time period between then to get some feedback to me, and then so we can have a kind of a final to look at.
Would Mrs. Fairgrave, just to clarify, you want a final one to take action on?
Ideally.
Yeah, okay. I just want to clarify for agenda setting. Okay, thank you.
Any other final thoughts? All right, well, this board has been so committed, and you've been working so hard. I know how much time, and it's not just the time in the meetings, it's the preparation time and the reading and the SWOT analysis as you did for me. That took time. And I just want you to know you're all volunteers. And Dr. Pearson, I know you're not a volunteer, but boy, are you working hard. And I want you to know that I recognize it, and I'm certain your community recognizes it. So I wanted to thank you. And I will get this information right back to you by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. And yeah, that's all I have, unless you have something else.
Lori, I just wanted to thank you for facilitating tonight, and also taking a risk. We talked before everybody got together that we are the first district that is doing it in this goal setting in this type of format. And so just thank you.
No, thank you for your willingness to do this. Thanks. All right. Any other thoughts?
No, thank you for your
Great.
time.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
Lori.
Yeah.
All right. We,
All right. Good night.
Good night.
before we do have to, I need a motion to
Oh,
adjourn.
yep. Sorry.
Yes. So moved.
Mr. McNally,
Second.
Mr. Bryant. Can we do it all in favor or do we have to do roll?
Do by consensus.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing nothing. Motion passes. We are adjourned at 8:05.
All right. Thank you, everyone.